Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Collison from Inspired Creations, and this is a short tutorial on how to make royal icing. The first thing that you need to know about is the egg white powder or substitute, or if you're using raw egg whites. Raw egg whites is something that is not often used now, and there is a separate recipe for that on the kit list that has been provided if you're taking a royal icing course with us. Egg white powder or pure egg albumen, meringue powder, egg white substitute, they're all the same thing. There's lots of different brands. So this one is from Squire's Kitchen. This is 100% spray dried and pasteurized free range egg white. This is the strongest one on the market and recommended if you're working in advanced work. You can buy online egg white powder. This is a huge packet. You really don't need more than maybe 100 grams. That would last you a few batches because you only need 15 grams per batch. That will give you nearly 500 grams of royal icing to play with. Egg white powder, again, it's exactly what it says. You can also buy from the supermarket Dr. Oetker meringue powder, and there are other brands. So as long as it's egg white powder, then that's absolutely fine. I prefer to use the powder rather than the fresh egg white or the little chick's egg white that you can buy in a carton from the supermarket. And the reason for that is because you can never judge the full water content of an egg white if it has not been dried. With this, you reconstitute it, you rehydrate it using water, and the quantity of water is 75 milliliters to 15 grams of egg white powder. The recipe has been provided. If you are working with pure egg albumen, this has to be rehydrated before you work with it, before you add it to the icing sugar. So this one, you would weigh out your 15 grams of pure egg albumen, and this would go into 75 milliliters of cold boiled water, and you would leave it for a few hours, shaking it occasionally so that it actually rehydrates fully. And when you add it to your mixture, you would put it through a tea strainer or a fine meshed sieve to make sure that none of the lumps go in. You do need to use every bit that's in the glass that every bit of it needs to go into the mixture to keep it nice and strong. If you have another egg white powder as an alternative, then you don't need to add any, you add the quantity of water, but you add it at the point that you make your royal icing. So you would sift in your egg white powder with your icing sugar, and then you add your water quantity. In terms of what icing sugar to use, I don't have a preference anymore. Tate and Lyle is fine. It is a cane sugar. In theory, it gives you better results, but it's very difficult to work with without double sieving. So I use silver spoon, which will either need a single sieve or sometimes not. You don't need to sieve it at all. Just allow a little bit extra in the recipe for silver spoon because it's very fine and it absorbs the moisture much more than the Tate and Lyle does. And you're looking at having between 450 grams and 500 grams of sifted icing sugar for a single batch recipe. So a standing mixer is the easiest tool to use rather than a hand mixer, just because you can walk away from it. And also we're going to be put it on the lowest setting, so we don't want anything whisking up, as that adds a lot of air into the royal icing. The speed at which you're going to work is very, very low. And also you need to make sure all your equipment is grease free. Otherwise the royal icing will go all stretchy. It won't settle or set or work for you as easily. So in here I've got just over 450 grams of sifted icing sugar. I've used a silver spoon. It's gone through a fine mesh. And I've got 15 grams of my egg white powder, so that can go in, and that needs to go in through a sieve as well, just to make sure there's no gritty bits in there. So we can just sift that through. And of course, if you remember a little earlier, I mentioned that if you're using the pure egg albumen from Squire's Kitchen, you have to actually hydrate that egg white powder with the quantity of liquid in the recipe before you add it to your mix. And now I'm going to add my 75 millilitres of cold boiled water. That can just go straight in. And we're ready to mix. I'll just switch that on. I'm going to turn that on low. And with my mixer, this one, it will probably actually, once it starts to struggle, try and increase to a higher speed. But I just need to make sure that I keep turning it down to number 1 so that we don't have a mixture that's very, very aerated. After just a minute, you can see already that the royal icing is starting to mix, or should I say the water is starting to combine with the icing sugar and the egg white albumen. So after a minute, I'm just going to scrape around the side of the bowl just to make sure that all the mixture is going to come together. This spatula that I'm using will be washed before I scrape again, but you can see this is very loose at the moment, also somewhat shiny. This is not ready. It needs to be a lot firmer, and it takes up to about 10 minutes, possibly 15 minutes before your royal icing egg albumen will start to help it look a little bit meringue-like and kind of soft sheen look to it rather than shiny. So we're looking for a meringue look without the aeration. I'm going to put this on now for 2 further minutes and I'll show you again. This is the mixture after 2 minutes. You can see that it's still a little bit on the shiny side, and also it's not holding its shape. It's still very, very thin, but I don't need to add any more icing sugar at this stage. I need to give it a little bit longer. So I'm going to put it on for about another 3 minutes and I'll show you again. Okay, so it's still, after 3 or 4 minutes, it's still too loose. It's falling over itself still. The idea is that when you dig your tool in, it should come up to a peak and then slowly turn over, but this is still a little bit soft and you can see it's still shiny as well. So what I'm going to do is adjust it slightly by adding in this is sifted icing sugar, and I'm going to put 2 heaped teaspoons in. So this is just to adjust it slightly, and then we will mix it again for a further 2 minutes and I'll check it. The mixture will go for a further 2 minutes as mentioned. It's starting to go a little bit dull now and look slightly more meringue-like and not as shiny. So I'll give it another minute and then I will check it. I think you could possibly see now that this is a lot more meringue-like and less shiny. And if we test it, I'll scoop this off. I'm just using a smaller spatula now because it's easier to test the mixture. Let's scoop the majority off that. It feels thicker. It might still be a little bit soft, but we'll just have a look. So if you scooch some of it into the center of your bowl and then put your spatula in and gently draw out, you should find that you will get a peak, which will then just come over slightly. Now, I obviously haven't picked up enough of this. Let's try it again. Yeah, so you can see that it's just peaking and then it's just tipping over. I'll show you that again in a moment. I can see, however, a few shiny areas. So I'm just around the edge here is a little bit shiny. So that could be where the moisture, the water, has not been fully incorporated in the mix. So I want to give this just another minute and then I do believe that it will be finished. So now I believe that it is done. As I pull the tool out, I do get my peak and it's toppling over just a little bit. If I take this out of the way so you can see, just scrape the excess off here because it can all be used. And all told, I think that's taken about 10 minutes. So if I just scoop that together and put my spatula in the middle, can you see how it's turning up and over? Let's do that again. So that's how you test that it is of soft peak. So kind of soft peak is for the majority of piping. You would have it a lot looser for runouts, and that's something that we will talk through in the lesson. Can you see how it just turns over like a bird's beak? Stiff peak would be where you're piping pressure pipe flowers, things like that. So if I just turn that on its side, you might just see the little bird's beak in there. Now to store, we would use a plastic container. And I'm going to scoop in the royal icing from the bowl directly into the plastic container. I'll keep this small spatula because I can use it to scoop off the excess. So just getting everything out of the bowl. It will store in the plastic container with a plastic bag covered over it, and then a further plastic bag around the outside of the container so that it is all nice and airtight. You must make sure that the bag is touching the royal icing so that there are no areas where the air can get to it. If the air gets to it, it will dry and form a crust, and that can transfer into royal icing. So I'm just going to clean off the top here carefully. And then I've opened up a plastic bag. Put my hand in that for a moment, and then I can put that onto the royal icing. You could wash the plastic bag up and reuse it. So that sits directly on the top. So the bag's on the top of the royal icing here. And then I take a second bag and place the whole tub into the bag. And we're going to tie that up. Now that royal icing will stand out of the fridge, just in a normal temperature room, for up to 10 days. It's usable straight away. The best time to use it really is the next day. And any leftover royal icing that you know you're not going to use, you could turn into pastelage. The recipe for that is on the kit list if you're doing a class with us. So I hope that you found useful. And now I'm going to go on to showing you how to prepare a piping bag with a coupler and without a coupler, so that you are aware of that before you start class. But we will do all the prepping, colouring and adjusting of the royal icing in class for the different techniques that you're going to learn. I'm going to show you how to prepare a piping bag so that you can fit a coupler into the bag, and that way you can interchange your piping tips. So the kit list, if it says 4 couplers and 4 piping bags, that means you need the right amount of couplers and piping bags and piping tips so that you can get the most out of the lesson. So for this one, what I want to do is show you how much to take off the bag to get the coupler in. We can do this in class, but this is just an initial session just to show you how, and that way it will be a lot clearer when you come to do the preparations in class. My apologies, because I'm moving, the camera is not focused. Let's try and get this focused back. There we go. So what I've done is push the coupler right into the bag, and you'll notice that I've taken the twisty bit off, and within the bag you've got the coupler which has got this U shape in it. I'm going to push the coupler right to the end of the bag as far as it goes, and where that U shape is at the bottom, I'm going to use my scissors to score right at the bottom there. I'll put my hand behind there, you'll see it just there. If I push that back now, using the score line that I've just created, I can cut across the bag. Use a sharp pair of scissors. These for some reason are not working. Oh dear. And then we can push the coupler in, and if you scored it correctly, it should come in just below the U shape. I've cut a little bit too much off there. The scissors are not very sharp. And that means now that your bag is prepared to put any piping tip, and we can move this around and put a coupler on there. So if your kit list gives you a list of couplers and piping tips, you will need that number of couplers, piping tips and bags.